they rely on him so much because he's just not the same player anymore. He's 34 years old. He's going to turn 35 this season. And in NBA years, that makes him a dinosaur. And for them to be relying on him so heavily, it makes you worried when you look around the conference. We mentioned this a little with the Blazers when Pete was on, but you need to be able to defend some of these perimeter guys, and that is what Jeremy Grant can come in and do. Now, the question for me, Jason, and this will really, to me, determine a lot of what their ceiling is can Grant become that guy? Can he step in, and most importantly, can he hit the three? Last year, Jason, he increased his attempts by over 2 a game from beyond the arc and ended up hitting almost 40% of his threes. Those were very open shots coming off of Russell Westbrook passes and off of double teams of Paul George. If he can continue to hit that, Jason, he will suddenly become maybe the second most important player on this team. Not the best and not the second best, but the second most important because he could be their best two-way player with his contributions on both ends. And that is something that they desperately, desperately need, even more so because he can flip-flop between the 3 and the 4. And to me, that's what's going to really determine their ceiling, Jason, is how can they do it defensively? Can they defend other teams? Because they were better a year ago, but I'm not sure I trust those numbers. They had some fluky numbers, and when it came down to it, I didn't feel like they could get stops. I mean, am I crazy?
Well, I think you're a little crazy for saying he could be the second most important piece of the team. I mean, he's a great complementary piece, but when you talk about the two most important players, you got one, Jokic, and two, I think it's Jamal Murray. I think their pick and roll game will be lethal. I think Jeremy Grant will just have to do his part on the defensive end of the floor and then just kind of stand in the corner, spot up. He can slash, things like that. So I think he needs to just, develop into his role. And I think he's a great fit on this Denver team. But as far as importance, I don't think he's, make or break, but he was a great addition to a team that really didn't need too much heading into the offseason.
Yeah, I think it's going to be all about defense this year. Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic are just, they're a below average defenders at their positions, and that's what worries me about this team. Now, the flip side, as we get to the ceiling of this team for me, is that offensively the sky is the limit. Jamal Murray could take another step this year. Nikola Jokic is already the best offensive big man in the league. Now they surround them with shooters, some two-way players like Jeremy Grant. They have a very deep bench. I think that's going to really be great for them. So to me, I think that the ceiling for this team is to get where they couldn't get last year, which is the Western Conference Finals. I think Jokic is really a mismatch for them. And if Millsap and Grant can play alongside each other, they can hit threes. All of a sudden, you'd have a pretty good defensive team as well. That could really spur them. So for me, Western Conference Finals is achievable for this team.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to make one of my bolder predictions here in our Baseline Jumper NBA season preview, division by division. I think they can win the whole damn thing. Yeah, I said it because they have all the pieces. I like that they're built from within. And I think with the Warriors releasing their stranglehold that they had on the conference, the Rockets being a head case waiting to erupt, and then the injury concerns with the LA teams, I mean, why not Denver? My only question is, can they do it again, this time with a target on their backs? Because going into last year, nobody expected them to finish second in the West. Maybe a playoff team, but they came out and they surprised everybody. See, now everyone in the league knows who they are. They know what they can do. So can they do it with added pressure and expectations?
You're absolutely right. And that's the question when we talk about the floor of this team, because like many of the other Western Conference teams that were pegging for potential playoff berths, I think that their floor is getting knocked out in the first round. They could win high 40s in games. That would be obviously not as great an outcome as people are probably expecting, but they could end up down there, and then they could end up with a tough first-round opponent who just knocks them right out. And I think that's sort of their floor. Maybe they only win 48 games or something this year, 46, 48, something in that range. Maybe they have an injury, what have you. They get a tough first-round matchup, and then all of a sudden they find themselves watching from home after the first round, Jason. So I think that's possible. I tend towards the ceiling of this team, but it is possible that they just narrowly make the playoffs and they finish as a bottom seed.
Wow. Our ceilings and floors for this team are all over the place because I'm not going to say they're guaranteed a first round win, but because there are no guarantees in basketball, but I'm going to say their floor is a second round exit. I mean, I think they're that good. Their style of play just flows so nicely with today's NBA. I think they'll be a top 4 seed. I think they'll have home court in the first round, playing in Denver, the Mile High City, the altitude affecting the opposing teams. I think they'll win at least a first round matchup. So my floor for them is a second round exit. Moving over to our over-unders, DraftKings set it at 52.5. I'm going to take the over, but slightly, because the Western Conference is a gauntlet.
And I tend to be right there with you. I think that this team is well suited for the regular season. They have a lot of depth. They have 2, star players really who can help them kind of weather an injury. So I think they're positioned to take the over on that. I like that bet. I guess I'm going to start us off on our next team here, Jason, which are the Utah Jazz.
It's so funny? I started to talk and realized I was on mute.
Well, this is what team playership, camaraderie. I don't know what a good word for it is, Jason. We're both not on our A game, apparently. But that's what I'm here for. And speaking of that sort of camaraderie, a team that plays together, I think the Utah Jazz have been known for that. And I thought that this was a fascinating offseason, Jason, because we've watched this Jazz team perpetually kind of be the bridesmaid and never the bride. They're always the team that seems to get close but not quite there. They feel like a team on the rise. Gordon Hayward leaves. Obviously, when we were growing up, they were the team that basically Michael Jordan beat every year, it felt like. So to see them this year kind of go away from continuity, to say, you know what, we're pushing our chips into the middle. We're going for it now. They add Mike Conley, Bojan Bogdanovic, and Ed Davis. They already have Donovan Mitchell, who's the captain of the Team USA group that just was in a somewhat disappointing, but nonetheless, in the World Basket competition that they just had over in China.
FIBA Benjamin.
FIBA basketball, thank you. I said World Basket. I was thinking Eurobasket, but I knew that wasn't right. And then obviously they have Rudy Gobert and Joe Ingles. So, I mean, Jason, what do you make of this team that certainly has made some big moves in the offseason and seem to be signaling their intentions to compete for a title?
Well, I was starting to talk, albeit to myself, because I was on mute, but I was saying this is probably the most interesting team in the division. I know we talked last week about, certain teams being super interesting and, that being the Atlanta Hawks being interesting because they have a young core. Now I think the interesting equivalent in this division is the Jazz because they had a core of Mitchell, Ingles, Gobert. They had Conley, Bogdanovic, Ed Davis, Emmanuel Mudiay, Jeff Green. So they are locked and loaded, and they are going for it. I like how they're built. I think they had a great offseason getting a guy like Mike Conley, who's the best NBA point guard ever to never be named to an all-star team. So he leaves Memphis. I think the change of scenery will be super helpful for him, playing with a young backcourt star in Donovan Mitchell. You have Rudy Gobert as the defensive anchor. So I think this team is built to contend for an NBA championship. The question is, will they in a loaded Western Conference? Because, Ben, I believe you have some concerns with the Utah Jazz.
So my concerns, I mean, the more I've thought about it, even while we've been talking today, I wonder if I'm not too harsh on them as far as a regular season team, because ultimately my main concerns are that I don't love their defense outside of Gobert. Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic, I mean, Mike Conley at this stage of his career, and you have to make that distinction. And Joe Ingles, none of those guys are really all defense type guys. And as good as Gobert is, it just leaves a lot for him to do. And it worries me that, similar to a couple of the other teams we talked about, I mean, they remind me a bit of the Blazers in that respect, in that the teams that I think they have to beat to win a title, it feels like they don't match up well with those teams. And that worries me, especially on the wing. I think they're a little small on the wing, and really a little small all around, Jason. I mean, it strikes you when you look at this team that they're going to have a small point guard in Conley, and if Mitchell is the 2, he's a little small for the 2. You look at Bojan Bogdanovic and Joe Ingles. I mean, whichever one of them is playing the 4, it's going to be a little small there. And then obviously they're huge at center. But it just makes you worry a little bit if they're a team that could get beaten up a little bit by a more physical, more athletic team come playoff time. So that's really my concern. But to me, Jason, it comes down to one thing. And the whole season for the Jazz is going to come down to this. Not to be overly simplistic, but it depends on Donovan Mitchell becoming a superstar. If he becomes a top 10 or 15 player, which is not inconceivable, this is a championship contender. They are legitimately that good around him, but they are missing that piece. They don't have, and I'm sorry for the advanced metrics, folks, I just don't believe that Gobert is that valuable. We've seen it in the playoffs that teams can scheme him out, and so I have my doubts. They need a superstar, and Mitchell is their chance at that. If he can achieve that, Jason, this team can win a title as soon as this year.
Yeah, I mean, I have some concerns too. I do think that they're going to miss Derek Favors very much, who they traded away. And then the other question for them is Dante Exum ever going to evolve into something? You know, they have Emmanuel Mudiay playing behind Mike Conley. Will Exum see the floor this year? I think that remains to be seen. But no matter what, this team is a contender. I love what they did building from within. Ed Davis is such an underrated signing because you saw what happened with the Nets when he got hurt in the first round against the Sixers. Joel Embiid abused Jared Allen, where in game 1, Ed Davis came in, played his minutes, and the Nets won because of it, that first game in the series. So Ed Davis is so valuable to a team that I think that they have one of the best center combos in the NBA. I think their weakness is the power forward spot, but Donovan Mitchell's potential elevation to superstardom can really mask any of those deficiencies. So it is pretty fair to say that the entire hopes of their season are riding on the emergence of Mitchell and how much Conley truly has left in the tank.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this team, that's what makes them so hard to project. So when we get to the ceiling and the floor, as I said, I mean, I think you could make the case that their ceiling is an NBA champion. Because if Donovan Mitchell turns into, you know, prime Dwayne Wade, which some people have actually posited, you know, yes, this team's ceiling is that. For me, I don't see it with him quite yet. I don't see the passing instincts, and I don't see his impact on other parts of the game. And that leaves me a little bit cold in terms of his overall impact on the game. And we saw it a little bit in FIBA, yes, not World Basket, but FIBA, when he really, you know, he was able to dominate as a scorer, but it felt like when he couldn't get downhill, when he couldn't get those buckets, he struggled to impact the game. And so for me, I think that the ceiling for this team, similar to a lot of these other teams, is probably the Western Conference Finals. I just can't imagine them beating teams, you know, 3 times in a row in the tough West, because I just don't think that he's quite there yet. And maybe he'll prove me wrong, Jason, but to me, it's Western Conference Finals.
So this is the thing, though. It's not like if the Jazz don't win it this year, they're going to blow it up. You know, aside from Conley, they're a pretty young team. A lot of their guys are either entering or in their prime. So I'm going to say their ceiling is the second round of the playoffs, maybe the West Finals if everything shakes their way. But there's no super urgency because if they lose, they'll just bring it back next year, maybe try and tweak it a little bit, you know, if Gobert is exiting the prime years of his career. But I think they're going to be fine. This team is built for the long haul. So if this is not their year, which I don't believe it will be, make it to the second round of the playoffs and build on top of that, because they're not really a team designed for turmoil, you know, like the Rockets are, like the Lakers and the Clippers, or even Golden State with all the egos on their team. This is an actual team. I think they're going to mesh really well together, and they'll be here in the conversation for at least the next 2 to 3 seasons.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to our over-under. And for this team, they are listed as one of the highest of the teams we've done so far. They have an over-under of 53.5 games, Jason. I was actually, to be honest, a little surprised to see them have a higher over-under than the Nuggets. And for me, I have to go with my gut, and my gut told me to go under. A lot of the analytics, the underlying numbers, say that this is a team that you should feel more confident in. but I just there's some nagging feeling for me with